Matthew chapter 14. And thinking about today and all that goes into today, being February the 4th, 2018, it's Super Bowl Sunday. And it's, whether or not you're cheering for one team or the other team tonight, or you're cheering against both teams, you're cheering for the commercials, or you're cheering for the refs, or you're cheering that the NFL has the lowest ratings it's ever had. Whatever you're cheering for this evening, it's Super Bowl Sunday. And the Super Bowl marks the biggest, the largest event on television the entire year. There is no other TV show that more people watch around the entire world than the Super Bowl. As I'm thinking about the Super Bowl and having watched past Super Bowls and all that goes into it and the skill level that goes into it and the pressure that some of these players have put on themselves and they're experiencing right now as they begin to do the preparations they have, I start to think, what do you do when the Super Bowl's over? Let's say, what do you do when you win the Super Bowl? Tonight, one of those teams is going to win. What do they do when they're putting on the T-shirts that have, world champions, and they get the hats that say world champions, and they're out there, and the confetti goes off, and everything is crazy, and they bring out the trophy, and they bring it down the line. Everybody's touching it, and they bring it up to the platform and present the trophy, and they present the MVP, and then it's over. What do you do after you win the Super Bowl? And this week I read a lot of articles interviewing a lot of past Super Bowl winners and some things that they experienced, some things that they did after they had won the Super Bowl. And they kind of described what went into the post-celebration. There was actually one guy who, as the second the clock wound down, he ran and grabbed the game ball and ran and hid it in his bag in the locker room and then ran back out on the field and put his hat and shirt on so nobody would know that he stole the game ball. But they all kind of had the same story. They say, there's the confetti and the celebration, and that goes by so fast, and the trophy presentation. Then they go back to the locker room, they celebrate for half a second. Depending on how far away they have to travel, they may have to immediately go and hop on a plane and go home. Some of them may go back to the hotel and they celebrate for a little while, then they hop back on a plane or a bus and they go home. They said, it never really sinks into them what has just happened, really, for most of them, until they see their family. And they see the expressions that their family has, because their family knows all that the sacrifice that went into to make that moment possible. And they experience the jubilation and the excitement of the moment. And then a day or so passes and they have the parade in their hometowns and everybody's excited. And then once a day or so passes after that, all of the excitement has kind of leveled out. And all of a sudden they realize, after having won the Super Bowl, we've got to do it again. And they have to report for training for the next season in April. That's when they start having team meetings and start preparing for what next year is going to look like. So they have 2 months of nothing before they can report in April. And what they all said is that you don't go home and just sit around and eat ice cream. Because if that happens and you report in April and they see that all you've been doing is eating ice cream for 2 months, well, then you're probably not going to be on the team next year. He said they said the second you get home and you celebrate, you always celebrate, but after you celebrate, you've got to get back to work. You've got to get back to work, because if you don't get back to work, then you're not going to be able to continue to work. You take a moment, you celebrate, and then you move on to what's next. You got to move on to what's next. And what we see here in Matthew chapter 14 is the beginnings of that very same principle from the mouth of Jesus. You see, what has just happened before we get into the passage we're going to be in today, we're going to be in Matthew 14, starting in verse 22, is what's just happened is one of the most well-known miracles Jesus does. He's been teaching, the crowd shows up, and it's a crowd of thousands. So many people that, they don't count the women and they don't count the children. There's just 5,000 men, so it's been estimated upwards of 10, 12, 15,000 people are there hearing Jesus. It becomes dinner time. Nobody's willing to give their food or show they have food, and so Jesus takes the food of a little kid and multiplies it to feed everybody, and everybody is full, and everybody is satisfied, and everybody's amazed at what they've just witnessed and what they've just experienced. So the disciples go out and gather up the leftover food of this massive miracle that's included in the other Gospels, and it's just fantastic and amazing. But after the disciples gather up the food, they don't have time to really relish in the moment of the celebration. They don't have time to gather up, huddle in a circle, and say, do you really understand what Jesus just did in feeding this many people from one little kid's lunch? Jesus doesn't give them time to celebrate that. Because look down at verse 22 of Matthew chapter 14. Matthew writes, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. Immediately. They don't throw that word around, lackadaisically. He just throws it immediately. The second they gathered up the food, they saw it was 12 basketfuls. Jesus made them get in the boat. He forced them into the boat because they had something to do. They had to get to the other side. He had something for them to do, and he had something to do. And so he said, guys, you've got to get into the boat. He's like corralling them to get into the boat, and he pushes the boat off. And they go across to the other side. And then Jesus takes the time to dismiss the crowd, to disperse. Oh, you almost went that time. I've gotten close before. That was as close as it's ever been. Anybody would have come rescued me if I would have bit the dust? Or seen if I would have preached from the ground? Yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you. But Jesus dismissed the crowd. This fascinates me, all right? Sometimes when people get to a certain level, they don't go back and do what they did when they, were interns, kind of stuff. This is something for the lackeys to do. Dismiss the crowd, then clean up all the napkins and stuff that they left sitting on the ground. Sometimes people when they get to that position, that's what they think. But that's not it. I mean, for Jesus, he's not above doing anything. He is the quintessential servant. He says, the disciples, guys, you got to go across. You've got something to do over there. And so he stays behind. He dismisses the crowd. He cleans up the area, does the litter thing, and he dismisses the thousands of people, the throng of people who are still there, doing what the disciples probably wanted to do to celebrate the moment. They're saying, having been satisfied with the food, they're amazed at what just took place. And Jesus is kind of pushing them out and say, go home. Y'all get out of here. You got to go home. You got to do your thing. You got to get up and go to work tomorrow. So he's pushing them out because he's got something he needs to do. Verse 23. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. So Jesus was up on the mountain by himself. He's praying. But since Jesus is up on the mountain by himself praying, that also means the disciples are by themselves doing their thing, and they are definitely not praying. Verse 24. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. So the disciples are out in the middle of the lake, and a storm has whipped up. And this little body of water, this little sea was famous for, storms popping up real quickly. It wasn't that far across. It was a few miles, and the disciples are about 2/3 of the way across. They should have already gotten to where they were going, but it says there, the waves are against them, the winds are against them, and they're trying to get where they're going, but they can't quite get there because the storm is so intense. Verse 25. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. Now, this is also one of the most famous things that Jesus does. Even people who don't believe in Jesus know this story, Jesus walking on water. It says the fourth watch of the night. That is right before the sun comes up. This is the darkest part of the night, okay? It's pitch black, it's dark, the storm is raging, and Jesus comes to them, he says, walking on the sea. Now, some of us have heard this story so much and so often that we kind of gloss over how much of a miracle this really is. We think we're so familiar with it that we don't recognize the greatness of what's going on. Jesus is walking on the water in the middle of a storm, all right? I mean, the storm is almost tipping over the boat. It's so intense with the waves and the wind. But Jesus is just calmly, if he's got pockets in his little robe, he's just kind of walking out there on the water towards the boat area, and he walks out there several miles. Remember, there's several miles out in the middle of this body of water. So he walks out there for several miles to get to them. Now imagine, again, how long does it take you to walk? 2 or 3 miles. And here Jesus is in the middle of a storm walking 2 or 3 miles on the water. And all the while, the disciples are on the boat, and they are freaking out. They are terrified. I mean, several of these guys have spent their lives on water, so they shouldn't be all that scared. But being on the water so often, they know the dangers of it. And so they are very fearful of what could occur. And they're out there experiencing what they're experiencing. Jesus is coming towards them, walking in the storm on the water. Verse 26. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. So the emotions and the experience they were already going through was the filter through which they saw Jesus coming. And because they were so fearful, they misinterpreted the movement of Jesus. They thought it was something else going on. They thought it was something bad. They were fearful. Here they are, having spent as much time as they've spent with Jesus day and night for as long as they have, and they've been apart from Jesus' presence for, just a few hours, and all of a sudden they've lapsed back to how they were before they had experienced Jesus. And they see this humanoid figure walking on the water, and their first reaction isn't, "Oh, that's Jesus. Oh, he's got the same clothes." No, their first reaction is, "It's a ghost." That's their first reaction. It kind of tells you a little bit about their background, that's what they think, that when they're in the middle of trouble, their first response is fear, and it's a ghost. Verse 27. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." A couple things to note about that. Jesus is far enough away that they cannot recognize his distinguishing features. Yeah, there's also the storm, the wind, the rain, all that mess. They don't recognize that it's Jesus. But somehow, with Jesus' supernatural power, when he speaks, they're able to hear him over the storm and the distance. He says, "Take heart, it is I." Jesus comforts them instantly. Verse 28. And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So Peter sees an opportunity here. If it's really you, command me to come out there. I want to do that too. And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, and he walked on the water, and he came to Jesus. So Peter hops out. He walks on water. I can't even imagine what's going through Peter's mind. I mean, I've never walked on water. I don't know, what the buoyancy, what it feels like, if it's, solid, or if it's, has a little give. Or what, but Peter's out there. I don't know if he stepped out of the boat and he was just kind of testing it to see if it would really hold him, or if he just jumped over the side. Knowing Peter, he probably just jumped over the side. He's walking out there in the storm, eyes fixed on Jesus, but then his eyes begin to wander. Verse 30. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Now this time when he's in trouble, his instinctive response is to call out for Jesus. Before, his instinctive response was fear. Now his instinctive response is a faith-filled cry because he has just had his eyes on Jesus. Verse 31. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Piercing Peter to the heart. "Why did you doubt me?" as Jesus is pulling him out of the water. I want you to note, though, we don't know how far away Peter was from Jesus at this point. He was far enough away that he couldn't grab a hold of Jesus. But Jesus doesn't allow Peter to sink. Peter makes a cry as he sinks. Before he's able to get under the water, Jesus covers the distance between him and Peter and grabs him before he falls underneath. Jesus isn't going to let us get below the surface before he's there. If we will turn to him, if we will cry to him. Verse 32. Jesus pulls Peter up. When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So they didn't say you were the Son of God in response to the feeding of the 5,000. But in response to Jesus walking on water and stopping the storm and saving Peter, that was something worthy in their minds of saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Maybe what you've been saying all along is the truth. And then they get to the other side of the body of water, to this place called Gennesaret. And over there, a bunch of people come and get healed by Jesus. And so I begin to think back to that first verse we read, verse 22. When Jesus made the disciples get into the boat, and he's told them to go before him to the other side. If the disciples had not responded in fear, what would have happened? Would Jesus still have come to them in the middle of the storm? If they had responded in faith in the midst of the storm, knowing Jesus put us in the boat because he told us we have something to do and we know we're not going to die because we got something to do over there. If they had responded in faith, would Jesus have needed to come to them in the storm? And if Jesus didn't come to them in the storm and they got to the other side of the body of water to Gennesaret, would their job then have been to prepare the way for Jesus? Because if you're going to go before somebody to an area, it's probably because you need to prepare the way. I think back to a mission trip I did when I was a youth minister. We made this big plan. I mentioned it a few weeks ago. It's a big, massive trip across 6 states and like 13 cities or something. And we do a city in the morning and a mission project, and then we travel over lunch and then do a mission project in the afternoon and spend the night in that city, and then get up the next morning and drive an hour and a half, do a mission project. And we did this for 8 days. But after having planned this for several months, the trip came and all the students piled on vans and they went to their cities. And I grabbed a few of the interns with me, and we had a trailer full of luggage. We had a kind of like our bus out there with full of equipment, and it was our job to go to the city we were going to spend the night in and unload all the luggage, unload all the equipment, set up the video equipment, set up the sound equipment, and cook all the food. We were the advanced team. We called ourselves the A-team because that's a lot cooler than saying the advanced team. All right? Anybody remember the A-team? So I was Hannibal, and anyway. And so we got to the city, and we did all this, and by the time we got everything unloaded and the food cooked, the crews would be coming in. But we had to get there first and prepare for hours before they showed up. If Jesus sends the disciples across, quite possibly their job was going to be prepare the area, get them ready. Jesus is coming, just like John the Baptist prepared the hearts of the people. But the disciples themselves weren't prepared to prepare. They weren't prepared within themselves to prepare anybody else. They had to be prepared first. And Jesus met them in the middle of the storm, began to show them the greatness of his power, and they began to have more faith so that they then, in turn, could impact the people they were supposed to impact. Jesus wasn't just sending them across the sea, without a purpose, without intention. Jesus always motivates on purpose, for purpose. Jesus always motivates on purpose, for purpose. Jesus has a purpose for you. You may be in the midst of a storm that you did not anticipate, and it may be rougher seas than you ever thought you'd be in the middle of. Financially, health-wise, career-wise, maybe just, emotionally or in the midst of a temptation that you just can't shake. Jesus can still come to you in the middle of the storm and walk with you through the rest of it. He doesn't guarantee, he didn't suck the disciples out of the middle of the sea and drop them over in the city on the other side. He sailed with them through the rest of the water to get to the other side. Jesus will go with you through the rest of the experience to get to the other side. He will be with you. But what stands out to me when Jesus made them get into the boat is that word made. Verse 22, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side. He made them get into the boat. He made them. That word made there, it means to force, to compel, but it also means to guide, to direct. Jesus had a desire for them to get into the boat and to go to the other side. What if the disciples had said no? We're not going to get in the boat. We're too excited. You just fed all these people from that little kid's lunchbox, and now all this is going on, and we want to celebrate. We want to just talk about how great this thing was that we just experienced. We don't want to go yet. We want to talk about this thing. They could have said no. They could have rejected Jesus' direction to get into the boat and go to the other side. But if they had, then the greatness of what comes at the other city would not have happened. They had to get into the boat. They had to go on to the next thing in order for those people to experience the healing that Jesus wanted to bring them. You see, Jesus told them to get into the boat. He had to force them. That's why that word is used there, that made word. He had to force them into the boat because they had a desire to stay. They had a desire to remain where they currently were. Undoubtedly, the disciples and the people there, that's why Jesus had to push the people out, had to dismiss them. They wanted to stay and talk about everything they've just experienced, all the greatness of what they've just seen a little while longer, experienced the miracle a little while longer. But if we become too focused on how we felt when the thing happened in the past, we will miss the greatness to come. If we become too focused on the thing that happened in the past, we will miss the greatness of the thing to come. If the disciples had remained where they were on the side of the sea, continuing to celebrate the miracle, then those people in Gennesaret would not have been healed. Maybe Jesus would have got there later on. Maybe it would have been a different set of people when he showed up, but it wouldn't have been exactly as it was when they get there in this instance. They've got to move on from what they were experiencing in the moment to go on to the next thing, because Jesus knew the thing that we should all know. We are only here on this earth for a limited period of time. We've got something to do for Jesus. That's why we're still here. That's why he hadn't taken you yet, because he's got something for you to do here. And so when you accomplish that thing, then he'll take you. Or when you've become, some of us, so belligerent in not doing the thing, then he'll take us because we're standing in his way. He tells us that in 1 Corinthians. Jesus wants to use us. He wants to help us to help him accomplish what he's got for us to do here. But we can't just focus on the one thing and neglect the next thing that's coming. Imagine if every miracle Jesus did was feeding 5,000 people. If every city he went to, he fed people. He showed up and Lazarus is dead and he goes, oh, I'm just going to feed a bunch of you. Lazarus is still dead. He's just feeding everybody. Here, take this and take that. You can eat this. And he shows up in the next city. Here, eat this and eat that. He shows up in Jerusalem to be crucified and raised from the dead. No, I'm just going to feed all of you. I'm not going to raise from the dead right now. I'm just going to feed you. It wouldn't have been Jesus' ministry. Everywhere he went, it was something different, something new, a different experience. It would have been monotonous for the disciples day in and day out. He did feed a large group of people later on in a different way, in a different area that had a different set of needs. But it was not the same. You see, Jesus almost never does the exact same thing twice, ever. Almost never does he do the same thing twice. It's usually something different. It's something that we never thought coming in that way. C.S. Lewis illustrated this in the Chronicles of Narnia with Aslan. I don't know if y'all have ever read Narnia, or it's been a long time, but it's a great illustration at the end of, actually, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And they're talking to the professor about trying to get back into Narnia. And he says, oh, you're not going to get back in that way, the wardrobe. He says, you're not going to get back in that way. If Aslan wants you to come back, it's going to be by a different path, because he doesn't do the same thing twice. And so Jesus does his miracle, tells the disciples it's time to move on to the next thing. You know, it's the same way in relationships. You know, if at the beginning of a relationship, that ends in marriage, at the beginning of the relationship, the dating relationship, you know, you got the butterflies and the excitement and you're joyous and all this stuff is going on. And then as time goes on, imagine, you know, if you try to recreate those butterflies, you try to force them. Okay? You always eat at the exact same restaurant you had on your first date because that was where you had the butterflies. That's where you had the feeling. And so you try to go to the same place. You order the same food. You go and see the exact same movie every time you go on a date. It's just the same. Same place, same food, same movie. You sit in the same booth because you're trying to recreate the same feelings you had. But if you try to recreate the same feelings you had, you'll never get to the greatness that comes from intimacy, that comes from time. If you try to stay in the place of the beginning, you'll never get to the greatness that comes later. And that's a lot of the problems in relationships, is they want to recreate this and to the neglect of the greatness that comes later, because they never anticipate that the greatness could be as great as it actually ends up being, because all they want is this. And this is just the appetizer. I mean, this is just the cheese. And, you know, this isn't nothing. I mean, over here, I mean, this is the ravioli. This is the tiramisu. I mean, this is the rolls. I need some Italian food, y'all. This is where it's at. And if we eat it over here, we're going to miss what's over there. We've got to move on from what was. Celebrate it. Yeah, that was great, but this just got us to this. We can't stay in the beginning. We can't keep playing t-ball. Sometimes we got to step up to where they're pitching the ball at us, and it's not just sitting there in front of us. We've got to move on to what comes next. The disciples had to move on. We need to move on. That means, celebrate where we are, celebrate what we experience, but then move on to the next thing. The disciples were made by Jesus, forced by Jesus to go on to the next thing. Sometimes, though, we are trying to chase the high that we got in the past, and we miss the one on high and what he has for us in the future. When we're trying to chase that feeling, let's put it in a church context. Let's get a little weird, okay? Let's get a little awkward. You're trying to recreate the spiritual feeling you had that one time in that one place when they sang that one song. And so every time they sing that one song, they better play it in the same way they played it back in the day. And they better do it this way, and they better talk about it this way, and they better sing it at the same pace they sang it then, because that makes me feel good and gives me the goosebumps, and I feel amazing, and I feel the Spirit. Good, great. That song does it for you, fantastic. But are you chasing the feeling, or are you chasing the Spirit? Because they're completely different. The Spirit can use the feeling, absolutely. But a lot of times we're just chasing the feeling. And that's a problem. If you're chasing the feeling and not the Spirit, we're almost creating an idol out of the feeling. We're creating worship out of the feeling. And so we begin to worship the feeling and not the one who gave us the feeling. And we miss what he wants us to see. And we don't move on to the greatness of what is to come. This is something I've done. I've done this. Maybe it's just me, but there are certain songs. There was a period in my life where, it was like 3 years, I listened to the same song every morning going to church because it got me revved up and pumped up and getting there and doing it. And then I realized what I was doing. I was worshiping the feeling I got when I was experiencing the song and not really worshiping the one who introduced the song to me really in the first place. I wasn't paying attention to the words. It just became ingrained in me. This is the feeling you get when that song plays. I've since then have played the song, and it's not the same as it was, because you've got to redirect and you've got to grow and say, stop worshiping the song and start worshiping the one the song's about. And you get reintroduced to whom Jesus truly is. And that next season of life is never like the last season. The disciples had the feeding of the 5,000, and then they had the storm on the water, Jesus walking on the water, and then they get to Gennesaret, and all those people are healed. Each one of those phases is not like the last. Each one is different. The next season will never look like the last season, but that is the great thing. Because in each season, we're being given a new opportunity in a new day to do something new for the Lord. It's a new opportunity. It's not a bad season. It's a new opportunity to do something for Jesus in that season. We need to experience the miracles. Yes, the miracles are great, and the miracles are fantastic. We need to celebrate the miracle, celebrate the event, celebrate the experience. But then we need to move on when we're directed by the Lord and move on. Experience the miracle. Celebrate the miracle, but don't worship the miracle. It's a subtle difference that we don't often recognize. Because too often we give too much attention to the miracle and not the miracle worker. We end up talking about how great that thing was and not about how great God was in doing the thing. Again, it's a subtle difference. But we may not see it initially, but it becomes ingrained in us that thing, the miracle, the experience, the event becomes the thing that was so great, not the God who actually did the thing. And Jesus didn't want his disciples to begin to worship the miracle that he did, the amazing thing that he did, and try to break down each element and worship each element that he did. When you see him when he broke the bread and it just kept reproducing and it was fantastic and amazing, yes, it was, but it was Jesus who did it. He was the one who was amazing, not the greatness of the bread itself. It was Jesus who made it great. He was the great one. And when we do that, putting too much attention on the thing, we begin to worship the thing. When something great happens and we rejoice in the greatness of the thing, and then when something terrible happens, that joy is ripped out of us. We're giving too much power to the event. We're giving too much power to the experience. We're giving too much power to even the miracle. If it is the greatness of the thing, the event, the experience, the miracle that lifts our spirits, then that event or experience or miracle can rob us of that jubilant feeling if it leaves, if it changes. No truer is this than in sports. Let me be a little transparent with you, okay? Can I be transparent and lay it all out there for you? This is me to a T, or has been. I am a Dallas Cowboys fan. My name is Josh, and I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. And I can tell you, Sunday after Sunday, in years past, when sitting on the couch, cheering them on, they would do a great thing. Des caught it, and it would be amazing, and they would catch it, and they would get the touchdown, and then they would get ripped up, and something terrible would happen. Or what was it, a year ago, before Romo got hurt, and they were losing to the New York Giants. Let me give you a rundown, all right? Cowboys losing to the New York Giants, which is like Satan winning, okay? It's just awful. And so they're losing, and there's 60 seconds left on the clock. Romo gets the ball, and he goes 100 yards, and they score a touchdown in 48 seconds. Kick the field goal, they win the game. Man, first game of the year, going nuts. This is amazing. This is our year. We're winning the Super Bowl. First time since 96. It's going to be great. Yeah, that didn't happen. But, you're celebrating in the moment. You're so excited. I'm jumping in the living room, almost waking the kid. He just died. And, and it was amazing. I'm so pumped up. Well, the next week, they just get obliterated. I mean, just wiped out. And I'm in the depths of despair, right? I mean, this is the end. It's over. The world has lost all its meaning. I don't see colors anymore. It's just terrible. Have you ever been that way, or is it just me? Whether it's the Cowboys or it's a sporting event or something that really lifts your spirits and you're so pumped, and then that thing gets yanked out from under you, and you're in the depths. And you're thinking, man, this is just awful. I can't believe it. And whether you say those words or not, it changes your mood, you know what I mean? And it changes how you respond to other people. And you get irritated and irritable at various things. And what has happened there is, at least for me, I gave the winning and loss, or the wins and losses, too much power. To where I allowed it to change my attitude and my spirit. When, if in reality I had my focus completely on Jesus, then the wins and losses, the circumstances, the event would not give me or rob me of joy. I would be content in the moment to continually have joy because it was Jesus who brought it to me. It would be me celebrating the miracle because of the miracle worker, not celebrating the miracle ignoring the miracle worker, acknowledging and, oh yeah, that was Jesus and it happened, but really celebrating the thing, the event, the experience, and allowing that thing to bring my spirits high instead of Jesus being the one who does it. We're to celebrate the miracle because of the miracle worker. Wouldn't you like to not have your highs and lows be dictated by the events of this world? Wouldn't you like to be joyous all the time? Paul tells us that. The Apostle Paul in 1 Thessalonians 5:16, he says, rejoice always. He didn't say, rejoice just when your team wins the game. Rejoice just when you get a raise at work. Rejoice just when your spouse is happy. Rejoice just when you get that food you want. Rejoice just when your kids are not going nuts. Rejoice just when your bank account hits that certain level. He says rejoice always. 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 That means for the disciples in the boat in the middle of the storm, Paul tells them rejoice then. Rejoice. Yeah, the storm is nuts and the storm is crazy. Yes, you got to pay attention to what's going on in the storm, but you can still inwardly and outwardly rejoice because of Jesus. That Jesus becomes what keeps your spirit steady. Even in the midst of craziness, even in the midst of temptation, even in the midst of financial crisis, even in the midst of health problems, even in the midst of a world turned upside down and a political system you don't understand anymore, Jesus can maintain for you if you will rely on him. Because remember, Peter was walking on the water in the storm when he was focused on Jesus. But the second he focused on the storm, The steadiness of his ground left him and he sank. Where is your attention? Where is your focus? Peter wasn't celebrating, Peter wasn't worshiping the walking on the water. He was focused on Jesus, the one who made him walk on the water. He was focused on Jesus. Paul speaks to us again in his letter to the Philippians about rejoicing in every situation, having a constant sense of joy. That doesn't mean that you're not sad ever, that you're only happy at certain times. Joy is deeper than happiness. Joy is deeper than sadness. Sadness and grief, that's a part of life. That's something that occurs. But joy is deeper. That stuff is surface level. It can get deep roots and get into your soul and cause bitterness and cause rage and cause problems in your heart and your spirit. But if we're maintaining a level of joy with Jesus, that directs our entire lives. And Paul writes about that in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 through 13. He writes, I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. And here's that secret. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. That is about being content. That is about having joy in the storm. That is about Jesus. A joy-filled life is filled with Jesus. A joy-filled life is filled with Jesus because joy comes from Jesus. The more Jesus, the more joy. The less Jesus, the less joy. And that's when we begin to allow those situations, the events, the miracles, the great things to bring us the highs and the lows. That's when we begin to inadvertently worship the thing and the experience and the miracle and miss the fact that it was Jesus who empowered those things and made them possible in the first place. A joy-filled life is filled with Jesus. The more familiar you become with Jesus, the more your focus and attention are consistently aimed in the right place. The more familiar you become with Jesus, the more your attention and your focus will be consistently aimed in the right place. Where is your attention now? Do you tend to focus more on rumor and gossip? Do you tend to focus more on negative things, on what you saw in the news last night or what you saw in the news this morning, and that sets your mood for the day? Or what sets your mood, what sets your attention, what sets your highs? Is it Jesus? Not that the miracle's bad. It's not bad. Jesus did it. He fed the 5,000. It's amazing. But it's amazing because it was Jesus who did it. The 5,000 never would have got fed if it was just Peter, James, and John, and the other guys. They would have just kicked everybody out, said, go home and eat your own food. Do your own thing. We get enough problems feeding ourselves. You go feed you. But the miracle came because they turned to Jesus. And it was Jesus who brought the miracle. And then when the miracle was over, they had a half a second there as they were collecting the food to celebrate. They experienced the miracle, they celebrated the miracle, and then he directed them on to the next thing because there were more people who needed to be helped. We need to experience the miracle, we need to celebrate the miracle, but then we need to move on when he tells us to move on and not worship the miracle. Allow Jesus to be our miracle. Because he's the one who brings it all in the first place. So that's the question, is do we want joy all the time that is not dependent upon our circumstances? And in order to have that, in order to even have access to that, we've got to have Jesus. And if you don't have Jesus, you don't have a hope of having joy in any circumstances. You've got to have him first. You need to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that he died so all your sins would be forgiven, and then he rose from the dead so that you can live after you die. And if you believe that, you get Jesus, you get the joy that comes with him, you get access to the Holy Spirit and the power that comes with him, but you've got to believe first. And then once you believe, you need to consistently turn to him because the storm is not going to stop because you have Jesus. If anything, the storm will intensify because you have Jesus. Because the enemy knows the power that comes with the Holy Spirit and the power that comes with Jesus. And he wants to knock you off balance so that you won't continue to access that power, that peace, that joy. He wants to mess you up so that you, not being focused on Jesus, will prevent others from coming to Jesus. That's his goal. Our goal should be to bring as many to Jesus. His goal is to prevent as many from coming to Jesus. So do you have Jesus should be your first question. And then, are you giving Jesus all of the attention he is due? And if you find in the moment that your spirit is lifted or your spirit is devastated because of situations and circumstances, maybe our attention is on the wrong thing.